Good evening, everyone joining us online. You're here at the Tulsa Center for Spiritual Living, where we're continuing our theme of vulnerability with the talk title of Seeing and Being Seen. And I'm Reverend Jeff Staton. Thank you for being with us. We're so excited to continue this theme. And I'd like to start with a quote from the guru of vulnerability, Brene Brown. She says, "We cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection." There you go. Got to push the button all the way.
Gotta do that.
I love the fact, and as I've been exploring vulnerability this month, to know that that is a spiritual connection. When we move beyond the surface level of connecting and interacting, and there's time and place for that, but when we move into that deeper conversation, or simply having the courage to reveal a little bit something about our thoughts or our experience in life, that God spiritual presence is working in that connection between the God in me and the God in you. So this morning, thanks to Brad and his downloads of wonderful ideas for us to be involved in the community, some of us met at the Inheritance Juice Bar in downtown, one of Brad's favorite places in Tulsa. The place is magical. It's open, it's light, it's bright, it's modern and historical at the same time. And it's full of healthy offerings if you want to have some good, healthy food, as recommended by Coach Brad. Brad's idea was an invitation for us to commune outside the walls of just church. And what happened and what happens when we gather is there's an opportunity to share what's in our hearts. What have we done in our lives while vulnerably putting ourselves out into the world? How do we care for others? What do we think about making the world a better place, not just as a slogan, but as actually doing something out there in the world? What I love about gathering together like that is there's some love and some laughter, but there's also that chance for people to share things that we don't know about them necessarily. And what comes out of that are sparks of the divine. Sparks that say, you know what, that resonates for me, and I'd like to support that or something even greater somewhere in my life. So thanks to everyone who participated in that. Stepping out in community is a place of vulnerability. Sitting down to actually talk and connect and share of our hearts is that opportunity to really be powerful. So today we explore vulnerability as a building block for a thriving and healthy community. We will see today that to the extent that we're able to nurture vulnerability in ourselves, we will see that outpictured in our communities and our relationships. We'll explore authenticity, connection, and belonging, and how they're possible when we're able to bring our whole self to life, while creating safe and affirming places for those conversations to happen, and also then encouraging others to do the same. It is in this that the power of vulnerability is actualized through lives and truly lived out loud. I'll also share a little bit about life coach and author Martha Beck, who talks about something she calls a vulnerability hangover. You ever had one of those? Which refers to the feelings that you have when you've shared of yourself and then worry that you shared too much. What she says is that when you feel this way, it's probably because what you have expressed is true for you, but maybe not aligned with what our mainstream culture values. And even though we say we don't care about that and don't want to fit in, so every now and then it's a little, oh, did I really do that, say that, share that? We sometimes get that response simply by being practitioners of the New Thought faith, whether you're unity or religious science or something out of the mainstream. Doesn't mean we don't share, but it is that possibility of vulnerability where the receptivity is maybe not what we thought. She says moving into vulnerability is not just a mark of courage, but one of the most positive things that can happen to you in terms of your relationships, your quality of life, and your presence in the world, all of which add to your sense of purpose. Ernest Holmes in Ideas for Living says, we see in each other the reflection or the manifestation of the everlasting life. And each is an individualized embodiment of it. Remember, the kingdom of heaven is already in us. We are in it now. It is only as we in harmony with it that we awaken to it. When I hear those words of Dr. Ernest Holmes, it reminds me, it kind of empowers and gives us permission to know that when something comes up to have an intimate sharing with another person, that is indeed spirit sharing with spirit, and that kingdom of heaven is already at hand. And can be a trust and faith that there is a safe landing place for the sharing from our hearts. As I said earlier, Martha Beck is a life coach. In fact, she kind of created the career of life coaching in many ways. She was born and raised Mormon and had 3 degrees from Harvard. She's a best-selling author, and most of her life has been an exercise in healing through the vulnerability of sharing of herself, seeing and being seen. Much of this path started when she decided to not abort her growing child who had been diagnosed with Down syndrome while in the womb. And at the time, she was a graduate student at Harvard. The culture at Harvard in high academia was one where her peers looked down simply on even having children at all, but especially one having the challenges of Down syndrome, where intelligence is and academia is seen above all. Her story about Adam, her child, ended up being an international bestseller and launched her career. If you haven't read it, it's called Expecting Adam, and it is brilliant and deep and spiritual on so many levels, as her child Adam really spoke to her in the womb and foretold in images things that would happen in her life. This from a Harvard PhD. As she invented life coaching, that career itself by her esteemed colleagues was seen similar to selling crack on the streets. Then later she wrote a book about her father, who was the head historian of the Mormon Church, who molested her. And she did so with a profound act of vulnerability in order to help other people to empower them who may have been experiencing the same kind of abuse. For this, she got death threats and was disowned by her family. Then she came out as a lesbian, once again in a culture that did not condone homosexuality, and she was criticized by the church. But nonetheless, she was willing to be visible, to be seen, and to allow others to be seen by the example of her profound expression. It's interesting to note that for about 12 years before opening her life to the world, she had a total of 4 different autoimmune disorders. She said she spent close to 12 years, mostly in bed. But after all of the vulnerable sharing, after living in integrity, not only from sharing from her close friends, but to sharing publicly on Oprah, on TV, through books, through an online presence, her symptoms are completely gone. And she's stayed that way for nearly 15 years now. Who knew? Healing through vulnerability. And I highly recommend, look up her books or her videos or podcasts. She's a wonderful, wonderful teacher and deeply spiritual. Martha Beck. So there are a couple talking points to review through the talk today. The first one is seeing ourselves. The other is seeing others. and then seeing the space between. So when it comes to seeing ourselves, as we let our light shine, says Marianne Williamson, interestingly enough, a presidential candidate, as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence actually liberates other people. In fostering communities where vulnerability and authenticity is nurtured, like right here, it's important to understand the role of personal reflection and our responsibilities. This sometimes means saying, wow, I really messed up there. Or I'm sorry, I should have listened or communicated differently. This level of vulnerability to actually speak those words when those feelings are happening requires us to be willing to see life from a more wide variety of angles and understand how our thoughts, words, and actions may have an impact on others. I've known a few ministers over the years, like this one, who may say something that triggers those who are listening. And that's life, right? Where the vulnerability comes in is when someone's feeling that way, to be able to say, hey, when you said that in church, here's my reaction to it. And I'd like to talk about it more. Think about the power of relationship when we have the ability not only to respond quietly, but to take the deep breath and say, hey, here's my response to what's happening or what you're bringing to the table today. Let's talk. There'd probably be a lot fewer divorces if we could only figure out a way to do that. What old frameworks, ideas, limiting beliefs, or biases are we carrying around on a daily basis that impact how vulnerability can show up in our own lives and the lives of those around us? We are then called to an expanded awareness of our connection to the whole and how intentionally perspective taking and personal reflection can serve to bolster that sense of connection and belonging. Seeing ourselves. Second point is seeing others. Louise Hay, the metaphysical healing teacher who learned that affirmations will change your life, said, if I want to be accepted as I am, then I need to be willing to accept others as they are. Really? Do I have to do that? Yes. Seeing others does not mean seeing them as we think they should be or for what they may be in the future. Instead, it requires those present moment eyes, right here, right now. Those eyes see not through the lens of judgment or comparison, but instead through the gentle gaze of awareness that just like us, each person we see is the unique expression of God. Have you ever, like in a meditation, not closed your eyes and instead used the term soft eyes? There's this feeling of just like, you know, keeping this sensual sense of, not sensual, maybe sense of awareness. It's almost like looking at a candle meditation, you know, where eyes begin to get soft. Like I can feel that if I feel myself getting tense, but just quiet for a moment and just sort of take a breath and let those soft eyes come. And all of a sudden I can sense, like with all my peripheral vision, everyone in the room right now. There's that opportunity to say, I am accepting it, life, you, me, as it is right now. When we begin to practice seeing others in this way, the result is a creation of communities and spaces where we're all invited to show up authentically, messiness and all. We're then called to recognize the challenges of vulnerability that may arise and address them head on without downplaying, bypassing, or ignoring. This is just so important in community, in relationships, and with ourselves. Through this, we create a vibration, a different energy in our relationship, a vibration of acceptance, honoring, and respect, which invites and makes space for vulnerability. And third, seeing the space between. The interesting thing about vulnerability, when we allow ourselves to be seen, we invite others to do the same. We call people into that space of real relationship. In this exchange, we find that beautiful way to create communities and nurture connection and belonging. This is not achieved through words alone, but through intentional action. This is not to say that we will always get it right, because I'm darn sure we won't. Vulnerability makes space for us to try, to miss the mark, to reflect, and try again. Vulnerability lets us make space to try, miss the mark, reflect, and then try it again. It invites us to listen, not waiting for the opportunity to fix or prove ourselves right, but instead to understand and connect and wonder about the magics that's going to happen in that space between us. When we're able to show up this way and create space for communities to do so as well, we see the power of vulnerability actualized, manifested, brought into life. And so vulnerability is not a one-dimensional concept. Heck, we're taking 4 weeks to go over it this month. It requires both internal awareness and external practice. And just like any new concept or activity, it takes practice and practice and more practice. And like Brad today, who invited us to break bread at the table, to have an opportunity to share experiences, opinions, life, by putting ourselves out there in that way. And guess what? Receiving love in return and receiving deeper sharing of vulnerability and life experiences that maybe not everyone would support or appreciate. It's a self-building, energetic prophecy that creates deeper and deeper connections. When we're called to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, to recognize the value of vulnerability and begin to create space in our lives and community to really live. This requires looking at ourselves from the more expanded view, seeing the connection that is present, and the value of creating space for that connection to thrive more deeply in our lives. So think for a moment, and we'll talk about this after. What ways can we allow ourselves to be seen? What ways can we allow ourselves to be seen? What ways can we support others in their efforts to be seen? And what role, finally, does clear communication play in creating space for vulnerability? And let's take those questions into prayer. In this moment, I know that there is only one. The wholeness, the depth, the breadth of that which I call spirit, some call God, some call it. But this presence, the universe, which includes you and me and everything in this life as we know it and beyond. I can take that simple energy of life, knowing that if God is all there is, then surely I must be one with that spirit. And so must you and you and you and you and you. And so with that knowing, I recognize that there is a space for the deep breath, the courage to move into connection by sharing of our hearts, our minds, our thoughts, our souls, with our successes and our so-called failures. To know that as we commune together in a place of authenticity and vulnerability, that we can truly create a world that is working in wonderful and magnificent ways. So with that energy of love, I know that right relationships are here now and present. And with this knowing, I know that there is more than enough for all of us to live from a place of abundance, knowing that all of our needs are met. And so too are the needs of the folks who are living on the street or living in Sudan or anywhere else in the world where there is a apparent lack of anything. We align with the aspect of abundance now and know it to be so. I know this to be true in all aspects of our body temple, inside and outside, from the tip of our head to the bottom of our toes, to the energetic vibration of our bodies that we know to be life. That any space where healing looks to be not present, I know underneath it is perfection, wholeness, grace, and we allow that to be manifest now. And so it is from a place of love that I give thanks for this knowing. I give thanks for this knowing of truth for all good, for all that is seeking to express as each person here and watching online. And with a gentle breath, I let this prayer go completely, fully, wholly into the law of life that says yes to my word. And so it is.